So I realize I stand between you guys and lunch, and I've jam-packed my presentation with mouth-watering food photos, so just warning you, be ready for it. So when Ben asked me if I would give a brand storytelling talk specific to the food industry, I literally jumped up and down with excitement. I've worked professionally in the food industry. I spent a ton of time at Dunkin Donuts leading their global social media program, and I continue to work with companies in that space. And it's such a passion point for me. I believe that food and storytelling are truly the perfect pairing. I think there's something really personal about food. It's a part of our everyday life, but it goes beyond that. It's part of our culture. It's the food that we grew up with, that our mom made for us. It's how we come together to celebrate a birthday, an occasion. It's such an important kind of emotional, kind of connected part of our life, and I think it makes it very exciting for companies in this space, whether you're a startup, whether you're kind of a product, a restaurant in the food tech space, you have a lot of opportunities to do storytelling around food. And look no further to what's already happening online every day. Every day, millions and millions of consumers snap and share images of the food that they eat. I looked at just the use of the hashtag food on Instagram. There were over 323 million uses of it, and it continues to grow. So, but the thing is, we're not actually just Instagramming our food. We're telling stories. These are all personal images that I've shared on social media. So it's my mom's idea of like a light lunch when I come home to visit in the US. Big Italian family, what can I say? Discovering crazy cool cocktails in London with friends, or the best salad I've ever had in my life while on holiday in France. Of course, France, right? But these are stories that we share each and every day. But what's the recipe for brand storytelling for people that are actually in the food industry? We as consumers are doing this, but how can businesses actually apply this? So I've taken my food puns to heart, bear with me, but I have my 4-ingredient recipe for best-in-class brand storytelling. The first ingredient is a big cup of purpose. So telling great stories comes from knowing who you are. It's really easy to say, okay, I know stories are more memorable, stories connect us, I'm a business, I'm going to tell stories. But you can't tell stories effectively unless you actually have a strong sense of self. And I actually think startups really get this because they have to come, from nothing to explain to people what they do, and they have to have people understand it very quickly. But I always advise businesses to start with, what is your purpose? Why does your brand exist? So, are you trying to solve a problem? Are you creating a new efficiency in the market? Are you tapping into a lifestyle trend? What is that problem, and how does that tie into your purpose? What does your brand stand for? So we're talking about corporate values, but we're also talking about issues. So we just heard about kind of food waste and the problem of food waste. That's a brilliant issue to stand for and really to tell the stories and tell that in a way that's inspiring to consumers. What about the culture that you want to nurture? So we always think about, this is my why, this is what my brand stands for, but who are you as a brand? What is your brand experience like? Your tone of voice? What's it like to interact with you, whether it's on your website, through your customer support, through your social media channels? How do you bring that culture of your business to life? And then last, but certainly not least, how are you perceived by your consumers and your industry? Because it's so easy to just stand on a pedestal and say, this is who I am, this is how I want the world to know me. But if it doesn't actually resonate with your consumers and your industry doesn't believe it, nobody will buy the story that you're telling. It will just be another marketing message. So an example of a company in the food space that does this really well is Plum Organics. They're from the US. They are an organic baby food brand. And they realized, they were founded from parents. We've heard this story time and time again. They were struggling with what they would feed their newborn. They said there has to be an easier way. But what they realized is every other food business in the kind of children's space talks about the quality of their food. So they said, we think actually based on the culture we want to nurture, we should talk about talk to parents, but not talk at them, not preach to them. Let's be one of them. Let's be on Team Parent, and let's focus on refreshing honesty. And the way they do this is through something really clever called Parenting Unfiltered. So they say parenting takes blood, sweat, tears, and butt wipes. If it's too heavy, ask for backup. So they're really cheeky, they're really bold, and they really have built this community of parents who swap and share the good, the bad, and the ugly about parenting. So if you see here, these are some examples from their blog, and they're also telling these stories on YouTube, but they say things like, I've just referred to myself as mommy, or not that we're keeping score, but I'm totally doing all the diapers. And they tell real-life stories from real-life parents as a way to kind of speak to that consumer lifestyle. And it works so well, and it's differentiated them incredibly well in the industry. They also are really cheeky. So around Valentine's Day last year, they launched the Do Your Partner campaign. And yes, they're talking about sex and having sex after having babies. So you think, okay, we're selling baby food here. Why are we talking about parents having sex? But they believe that you have to make time to connect. They did a survey where they surveyed parents, and they found that parents would prioritize sleep over sex. They would prioritize checking up on work emails. The stats are very saddening, I'll put it that way. But it was a great way to have a conversation and to tell that story. And if you have time, there's a really cheeky, hilarious video under this campaign name that they released that I highly encourage you watch. I felt like it might be even a bit too cheeky to share on stage today. So the second ingredient is several tablespoons of macro and micro stories. So one of the questions I get as the author of a book on brand storytelling is, well, what kind of stories should my company tell? And I always say that businesses have two main types of stories that they tell. The first is around macro stories. So this goes into the why that we were talking about before. It's at the core of your organization's DNA. They highlight your company's story, your founding myth. But what about micro stories? Micro stories are actually the lifeblood of your storytelling strategy. So if you think about it, it's that always-on approach. We have social media channels, we have blogs, we have press activity, we're doing events in the communities. How are we telling these stories each and every day? Well, I'm going to share with you an example of a company that does this. It's very close to my heart, which is Dunkin Donuts. So I mentioned to you, that was a very big part of my life, running their social media program. And I actually worked for them as they were going in the beginning, but going up into their IPO. So I saw the experience of actually how you grow and scale this business and then how you actually take it public, which was, I think, such a career-defining opportunity. But what I thought was really exciting when I joined was they lived their story. Their story is all about their customers and keeping busy people on the go running. So it is not just a marketing message. It translates into how you experience the menu items in store. Everything is meant to be portable and consumed on the go. It also goes back to the in-store tech. So we were working on the store of the future and what kind of technology needs to be in the store of the future for that fast customer experience. So things like digital menu boards, so you can get information more quickly, as well as things like a really robust loyalty program and even mobile ordering. So these things all maybe seem commonplace to us today, but quite a few years ago, that was very innovative for us. So an example of a campaign we ran that speaks to the macro story, it was called #MyDunkin. And it was the first time in my career I cast a national TV, radio, out-of-home social media campaign through social media. So how often do you sit with your advertising agency, and if you're a startup, there probably is the marketing person is all of those things in one, and how often do you say, okay, what stories do we want to tell? Let's invent something, let's create something. We said, no, we don't want to just create stories. We want real, authentic customer stories. So we used social listening on social media, pulled authentic customer stories, and then I reached out to the customers and said, hey, I have a project I'm working on I'd like to speak with you about. Imagine that you said, okay, let's talk, and you get cast in a national Dunkin Donuts ad campaign because of something you shared on social media. So that's the way to kind of tell that customer story and make it authentic. But we also did these always-on micro stories. a lot of times, being a marketer, businesses say, just get the products out, just talk about the product. But what if you actually showed the person behind the product? Say the manager of Donut Excellence in the secret Dunkin Donuts test kitchen, and you had him tell the story about why we have specific donut flavors, why they're different in China than they are maybe in Spain versus the United States, and how they personalize that menu. There's so many amazing stories, and for a big corporate conglomerate, it actually puts a more human face on the brand. And I think that's really powerful for startups when you're just starting. Show the people behind your business. Let them tell the stories. Let them tell what they're working on. That's really amazing and will make kind of your customers feel more connected to you. We also tapped into timely occasions. So we knew Halloween was a huge part of customers' lives. So instead of just talking about products and promotions, we said, who would Dunkin' Donuts be for Halloween? We had people decorate coffee cups. We got 1920s flappers, Superman, Frankenstein, pirates. And we actually told the story of the holiday through kind of the idea of costumes and getting dressed up. And then lastly, go local. So the business is completely global, but what happens in Maine versus Miami versus maybe here in Valencia is actually quite an amazing story. And you have to put that human face on the brand and show what's happening locally, and that's a very powerful way to get your business message out. So the third ingredient is to sprinkle in different mediums and channels. So did you know that 90% of information transmitted to the brain is visual? Or that visuals are processed 60,000 times faster than text alone? There's a reason why you've seen kind of the internet and social media channels evolve to where they are today. We as humans process information visually. This is why we swipe through Instagram, use that picture as your lead gen to pull people into your message. But it also can tell a story. So that's kind of the two things you want to think about is, are you using the visual to pull someone in, or are you actually using it to support the story that you're trying to tell? And things like video can be a much more immersive way to really tell that story. Maybe GIFs and memes are a way to express an emotion, have a humorous stamp on something. Or like a cinematograph here. So I worked for Sprinkler. I ran their creative and innovation lab. We were the agency of record for Magner Cider for a time. A cinematograph is a hybrid of a GIF and an image. There's only one element moving, and it endlessly loops. It's a great way to pull attention in. And the story we were trying to tell was around, it's been a long day, have your refreshing Magners over ice. Tell us kind of what your occasion is like. So encouraging consumers to tell those stories. But they also have infographics, great way to tell a data story, and you can tie that in with your PR efforts as well. So both when I was at TripAdvisor and at Dunkin' Donuts, we actually did a ton of surveys in terms of supporting our press outreach. We did one at Dunkin' around coffee consumption trends in the workplace. We partnered with Career Builder. We created an amazing infographic that actually pitted professionals against each other. So which profession needs the most coffee? Maybe it's someone working at a startup. Is it someone in the medical profession? Is it a teacher? And you started to have consumers kind of duking it out with each other saying, no, I need coffee more than you, and here's why. And you really spark a culture of telling those stories as to why. But what about Slideshare presentations too? So especially if you're in the B2B space, you can do a webinar, you can do an event, you can have an expert doing a Twitter chat. Take the kind of what happens with that activity, turn it into a visual SlideShare presentation. I mean, I could put this deck up on SlideShare. SlideShare is now owned by LinkedIn. It's hugely searchable, and it's a way for you to have that great leave behind. Or if you're doing demand generation, you can use that as a way to support that as well. So here's the thing, though. Where you tell your story actually shapes how you tell it. So you have to think about not just the visuals, but the channels as well. So KFC, I think, is a very bold example of doing this in the most wonderfully wacky way possible. They created a romance novel for Valentine's Day, novella. They said romance novella, called Tender Wings of Desire. And it was to support an extra spicy bucket of chicken wings that you could treat mom to for or your significant other for Valentine's Day. I'm not judging people's relationships, but I'm just saying these are things you could do. You can also connect with KFC's founder on LinkedIn. He and I are first connections. And what I thought was quite cool about this is obviously they have a figurehead character. He was a real person. He no longer exists, and he's been kind of reimagined. But you actually can read his professional story. So for you as a founder, A, make sure you're telling your professional story in your LinkedIn bio, first and foremost. But second, make sure you're doing it in a compelling way. I actually didn't realize the founder of KFC, didn't found the business until he was 65. And he actually tells the story of all the kind of failed businesses and other successes he had that led into founding that company. And then last, you might be wondering what this bottle is on the screen behind me. It's a bottle of extra crispy sunscreen. It's SPF 50, and yes, it smells like fried chicken. I know. But you know what? They were launching a new extra crispy bucket of chicken. They got 3,000 of these bottles made. They gave them away for free through a microsite. So obviously not every business is going to be able to do this, but the takeaway that I have is it's quite disruptive to do it this way. But also, if you're demoing at events and you have kind of booths at events, why not rethink the promo merchandise you're doing? And could you tell a story related to your business through it? I think it's quite clever and it's quite unexpected. And those are the kind of details that make you so much more memorable than everyone else that somebody's met that day. So I've recently discovered oat milk. I don't know if anyone else likes oat milk in their coffee. But I was pouring my milk into my coffee the other day, and I saw this thing on the bottle that said, "Welcome to the cult." And I was like, what the hell? Like, what is going on? Am I joining a cult by drinking oat milk? But they actually use their packaging to tell their story. It's a little weird, it's a little irreverent, but it actually really works. And I actually did a private speaking engagement with Tetra Pak, who actually makes a lot of these cartons. So in the B2B side of food, they actually tell the stories of what they do through it's the B2B to C side of it. So they can actually tell the stories through customers like Oatly. But actually, another shout out for Oatly is they have a really clever consumer-facing Instagram, but they also have a B2B Instagram focused solely at baristas. So selling into coffee shops is a huge part of their business. And they actually, through Instagram and through their blog, tell barista stories. So they're telling these stories in a way that speaks to the culture of these amazing people who make some of the best coffees we've ever had in our life, and I love that. All right. So the fourth ingredient is to stir with a remarkable customer experience. So one of the biggest misconceptions about brand storytelling is that it's only tied to the marketing department. To be a brand storyteller, the experience has to resonate across the entire company. So one example I loved coming from London is Pret A Manger launched a veggie pop-up. It was a limited time only, or LTO as those in the restaurant biz would say. And they got such overwhelming consumer feedback, they decided to extend it for the summer, and then they ended up making it permanent. So if you come to Soho in London, you can go and experience vegetarian or vegan menu offerings. And what I loved is, throughout the entire process, they encouraged people not just to tweet Pret A Manger, but to tweet their CEO directly. And he was responding with consumers, answering their questions, and he was writing a series of blog posts saying, here's what we learned at each stage of this process, here's what consumers are saying to us, and here's how your feedback impacts what is actually happening in store. And I think as an executive, that is one of the most powerful ways you can tell your story, whether you're a small business or you're a large business. Another example is customer service. So you might think, oh, customer service, customers get angry. I can't tell a story around that. I call BS on that. Tesco had a customer who found a worm in his cucumber. So if you work in the food industry, foreign objects in food is like your worst nightmare. What about a worm in a cucumber? So the customer goes, hey, Tesco, how are you going to wiggle your way out of this one? And they more than wiggled their way out of it. So they actually wrote a poem about the dead worm. The worm is named William, by the way. He got a name, he got a personality through this whole banter with the customer. 27,000 people buried in a Facebook post about another product actually responded to this poem from Tesco. They sent the customer a sympathy card, a worm funeral ensued, and it just became this ongoing story. And for comments buried in a Facebook post, it actually went completely viral, and I hate that word as a marketer, but it was picked up by all of the national news outlets in the UK, and it actually showed that, things happen, but Tesco takes care of its consumers, and it's not going to shy away from telling the stories of how they do that cleverly. So what happens, though, when shit really hits the fan and you go into crisis mode? I've had a few conversations actually here with people about crisis stuff even last night. So this is something our businesses face all the time. In the UK and Ireland, KFC ran out of chicken. So if you're a food business and you run out of chicken, that's not good, right? So it was actually an issue with their supplier. They had a new supplier come in. It was a big gap. Naturally, the internet went wild. Someone tweeted, KFC's run out of chicken. This is how the apocalypse starts. People actually even called the police about KFC running out of chicken, prompting the Metropolitan Police in the UK to say, please do not call the emergency number 999 about running out of chicken. We don't want to hear about this. So how bad was it? The story reached 80% of UK adults, 750 restaurants temporarily closed, and 19,000 staff were impacted. So it was actually pretty big. But what I thought was brilliant about this is KFC actually never shied away from the crisis. And they realized, so if anyone's ever done crisis PR, you tend to just have this very kind of legal-approved corporate statement. I've been guilty of doing this myself. They said the chicken crossed the road, just not to our restaurants. And every single day, they were giving stories. They were saying, this is what happened. This is our updates. This is how we're resolving this for you. We take this seriously. And what I think is important is they did it in visuals as well. So they actually shifted the narrative because they started to control it. And I also think this was brilliant by their advertising agency. They issued a formal apology with an empty bucket of chicken that said FCK. So here's what you really need to take away from this. In the age of the empowered consumer, your brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. And by prioritizing the customer experience, not only will your stories be more meaningful, but new stories will emerge. So some key takeaways here are telling great stories comes from a strong sense of who you are and your purpose. There's an art and a science to uncovering great stories. Go beyond the obvious. Look across your company, your employees, your values, and shape those stories and tell the stories that matter. Test, learn, optimize, and repeat. So just because you've invested in telling a specific story doesn't mean you shouldn't pressure test it in the market and see if it's actually resonating and be continually optimizing. And then last but not least, put consumers at the heart of everything you do for long-term success. So thank you so much.